to Ginny's, where East meets West, and a slice of Eastern philosophy becomes a part of Western thinking. I'm your host, Ginny Gong. Today's show focuses on human trafficking, one of the three largest criminal industries in the world and the fastest growing. Every year, millions of people are victimized and billions of dollars are profited. It is certainly one of the more heinous international crimes perpetrated against the helpless. One organization that has taken on the task of addressing this issue from a policy perspective is the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Joining me today is its executive director, a civil rights attorney with the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice formerly. Join me in welcoming Karen Ahuja. Karen, thank you for joining us to talk about this particular topic. You know, I saw a special that they had on human trafficking, and just the graphic nature of it all was just really bothersome to me. Let's talk a little bit about what is human trafficking and why is it becoming a buzzword? More and more people seem to be talking about this topic.
Sure. Well, I mean, on its very basic level, human trafficking means using force, fraud, or coercion to harbor, transport, or actually recruit individuals for the sole purpose of exploiting their labor. Another really basic way of thinking about it is taking unsafe migration plus slavery equals human trafficking.
Now, is that always connected with something sexual?
You know, it really isn't, because even if you're talking about sex trafficking, it's a form of labor. So the idea is that you're going to use that person for sex work or for agricultural work, domestic work, sweatshop labor work. It's all included. So, in many cases there is a focus on sex trafficking, but under it all is this idea that you're using someone especially for their labor, whatever that might be.
So those are the different forms.
Different forms,
okay.
But it's all sort of is forced labor in many ways.
So let's go through that again. There's the sexual piece where you are forcing someone
right.
beyond them wanting to do anything.
Right.
And what else is there? What other forms?
There's trafficking in agricultural work, forced labor in the farms and doing agricultural work. Also domestic work.
People don't do that willingly?
Well, I mean, obviously we hear a lot about sort of exploitation of workers generally, right? And sort of working for low wages and long hours, but sort of take that a step further where your movement is confined. There have been cases also where forced labor has taken place where they have actually locked up individuals to work in sweatshops. So they control their movement, they take away their documents, they make them work the long hours, also with very little or no pay. And they do that for many, many years. There have been cases in Los Angeles, cases in New York, and then also even domestic workers where ambassadors, diplomats, individuals will bring a domestic servant to the U.S., take away their passport, and make them work from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m., and that's a form of trafficking.
And they have no control over fighting that, right? I mean, they're helpless.
Well, in many ways they are, because that person sponsored their visa, and they are this particular individual is a reason why this domestic servant may be here.
Right.
But now there are agencies that do actually assist individuals if they're able to get away and seek help.
So how does that differ from smuggling? I hear about that as well.
Right. Smuggling, in some cases, can be voluntary. An individual, let's say an Asian woman in a country, hears about a great economic opportunity in the U.S. or some other developed country, and so that person will willingly pay money to be smuggled, illegal migration. But what happens where it changes from smuggling to trafficking is once that person gets there, through coercion or fraud, they're not going to get this great job as a hostess. They're now going to be a prostitute or a domestic servant or a sweatshop worker, and their movement is going to be controlled. So it's almost a fine line where, in some cases people pay a lot of money to actually leave their country and go to another country.
Let's talk a little bit about the sexual piece of it, because that was very disturbing to me when I saw this special. Young girls at very young age would really be available for anybody who's willing to pay for it.
Right.
Where is this very prevalent? I mean, are there certain countries where this is happening a lot more? It's such an international problem.
It is an international problem, and the problem is also there's not a lot of statistics and research out there. Countries, including the U.S., they don't keep accurate statistics on it. In some way, it's hard to sort of determine. But Asia actually is a country where a lot of the victims of trafficking originate, and U.S. happens to be a major destination country outside of Asia for a lot of these victims of trafficking. So the numbers, they suggest maybe 30 million. Actually, the Department of Justice estimates about 30 million worldwide. Some estimates are even higher than that. So it's not, since it is an international phenomenon, you can be trafficked from one country to another country. You can be trafficked even within that country.
Wow. So now there's a term, trafficked, right?
Yes, yes.
you can be trafficked.
Yeah,
That's
it's no
interesting.
longer relating to drugs, right? It's now traffic.
Right.
And the thing that's so, I think, incredibly disturbing about human trafficking is that a person can be used over and over again versus, a drug, it's used, it's gone. In this case is why it's so profitable, is this person can continually be
Now,
used.
a lot of I know your focus is on women, but much of this trafficking, is it focused on women in particular, or does it happen to young men and boys as well?
Yes. No one is immune to being trafficked. It's children, men, women, across the board. I mean, the majority of individuals that are trafficked are women and children. So that is definitely sort of, if you think about the disproportionate hardships in the world, a lot of it does fall on women, whether it's poverty, whether it's labor that's being exploited, discrimination, and so you often see a lot of women sort of finding themselves in situations where they migrate, and they migrate illegally, and then they
So
become
much of
victims.
this is for money, isn't it? I mean, that seems to be the root of why people do this. Now, I know that the United States has identified some of the victims that are in this country. What's being done to help them?
So we do have a federal law that actually prosecutes traffickers. And so that's been on the book for a few years now. And so the Department of Justice actually has it as a priority to prosecute traffickers. And also within that law is an opportunity if an individual, a survivor, a victim of trafficking, assists in that prosecution, they're able to get a visa to remain in the country and also get services. So the statute actually does has some pretty broad provisions around, more stricter penalties and also ways to help the victims. We always feel like you can go a little further as far as the services that could be available. But
so is that what your organization is advocating for, stronger laws?
Yeah, I mean, and also now a lot of states are passing laws at the state level. So, because it is really, it's so widespread that people don't realize. I mean, it really happens in your backyard in many instances. That's
why I wanted to talk about this topic. Are there states where it's happening more than elsewhere?
I mean, there are some entry points, some obvious ones. California. If you think about sort of people coming over, and also Texas, New York, there's some major entry points where you'll see individuals come through, but they are really all over the country because they're transported, especially when it comes to different forms of labor or even sex work. They may go from one massage parlor to one escort service, in different parts of the country.
That's diversity, isn't it?
I know,
yeah,
definitely.
The negative aspect of diversity.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I know that your organization has made some recommendations in terms of this particular issue. You want to share a few of them with us?
Sure. I mean, what I was saying initially was a real sort of expansion of services, like a very victim-centered approach. I think, as a tendency for government to do, very focused on prosecution, right? Let's get the bad guys, right? But at the same time, these individuals have been traumatized, and there really needs to sort of be a focus on them, and also make it easier for them to get visas when they're here, because sometimes it's not very safe for them to go back, especially if their families have been threatened. And also, a large part of what fuels trafficking are our immigration laws. Because our immigration laws are so strict,
and becoming more so.
And becoming more strict, it really does fuel trafficking.
Right.
If you think about it, work visas and someone who's able to come to work in this country has to be highly qualified, you know, maybe an engineer or a doctor, but we actually do need low-wage labor. But we don't have the kinds of laws that allow people to come. So what do? They come illegally. What do? They pay a smuggler. What happens? They end up being a traffic victim.
So, you know.
So really sort of thinking, I think, a little more intelligently and not sort of getting sort of consumed with, you know, what everyone wants to hear and, you know, immigrants are these sort of evil folks that are coming and sort of consuming our resources and that kind of thing. But and really sort of what does our economy sort of, how we need to thrive and what is sort of the source of.
So do you feel we're making progress into, you know, moving in that direction?
You know, that's a good question. I think, you know,
From your
well, as you
experience?
know, we've had all these, you know, the immigration rallies, and there's been, you know, it hasn't necessarily been focused on traffic victims, but overall, I think that there has been a lot of education in the community about the real struggles of immigrants in our country, and so, and I do think there's a particular maybe sensitivity towards victims or survivors who've been trafficked because of sort of the heinous, you know, context of the crime. So I think that in some ways they probably. Folks are able to sympathize more with them. And I think there's just more attention around the kind of abuse and violence that women or children face.
I think once people know what it is and how awful it is, you will have, you know, more success with
definitely,
it.
definitely.
Well, we seem to have run out of time. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about what your organization is doing. So stay with me. We'll be right back after this short break to continue our conversation with Karen Ahuja and the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Stay tuned.
To be a mentor, you don't have to have all the answers.
Interesting. You hungry?
Yeah.
You just have to be yourself, which, by the way, is pretty good. Do good. Mentor a child. Call 1-877-BE-A-MENTOR.
While walking in a toy store the day before today, I overheard a crayon box with many things to say.
I don't like red, said Yellow, and Green said, nor do I. And no one here likes orange, but no one knows just why.
Well, I bought that box of crayons and took it home with me and drew with all the colors so the crayons could all see.
That each of us is special and everyone's unique, but it's when we get together that the picture is complete.
Welcome back to Ginny's, where East meets West. I'm joined once again by Karen Ahuja for the second part of today's program to discuss the accomplishments of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum in advocating for APA women and girls. In the first part of this program, we discussed the issue of human trafficking and its impact on the victims and the community. Join me in welcoming back Karen Ahuja. Karen, let's talk a little bit about the Women's Forum, which you basically refer to as NAPOF, right?
Right.
Okay. What's the mission and exactly, how long has it been around?
Okay.
What are some of your accomplishments?
Sure. Our mission is about building a movement for social justice and human rights to address the concerns and increase the rights of Asian Pacific Islander women and girls in the U.S. and hopefully also, beyond the U.S. We've been around since 1995.
Okay.
We were founded following the UN World Conference on Women in Beijing.
In Beijing,
Yeah.
okay.
And we were
That
sort
was
of
the one Hillary Clinton attended,
yes,
right?
yes. So founded after that, and actually I've been an executive director for only about 3.5 years, and we've been a fully staffed organization for not that long, but have definitely been building up the organization from 1 when I was started to 6 staff now, and developing our programs like we talked about earlier on human trafficking and also on reproductive health issues, and also broadening our work in other areas as well. So
Now, do you have chapters across the country, or is it just individual membership? How does it work?
we do. We have chapters.
Okay.
We have 9 chapters across the country, and we also have individual members. And they're a big part of our organization and sort of contribute in the kind of work that we decide to do.
Now, and does the organization deal with individual cases and issues, or is it really more policy-driven?
It's more policy-driven. I mean, we don't do the direct service piece. We see ourselves as a national organization, but our chapters also, they do more of the community work, but not the direct service work. And our focus is on public education, on doing the policy work in the national level and at the state level.
I'm very interested in one of the topics that your organization has been dealing with, and that is the issue of comfort women. What is comfort women, for the sake of my audience who really doesn't know what that is?
I mean, comfort women is really a euphemism for women who were around 200,000 of them who were used as sex slaves during World War II by the Japanese military.
200,000.
200,000.
About mostly Korean.
About 70+% were Korean, and only 25% of them survived the ordeal. And so there was a lot of work that we did around comfort women, because they actually filed a case in the U.S. courts to seek reparations from the Japanese government and also a formal apology.
And how did that go?
Unfortunately, the case was dismissed, but it brought a lot of attention, a lot of sort of procedural issues around different statutes. It's challenging for individuals who live outside of our country, and especially a case against a country that has a particular importance to the U.S., right? So
people don't really want to touch it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that sort of was the case. The State Department spoke on behalf of the Japanese government, and even they were trying to push forward a resolution in the House and the Senate, and that also failed recently. So, but it brought to light the issue, and there was a lot of organizing around it, and our members and our chapters around the country were involved in that.
Well, I do a lot of work in the community, and I know that very often when I'm working with some elderly Korean women, the emotions around that period of time is just, I can't even describe it. It really seems to hit at the core of who they were and what has happened to them, and they can't seem to get past that. So I can imagine, 200,000 women going through this experience.
Right.
It's almost like the asking for the apology from the Japanese for the atrocities. There doesn't seem to be taking place.
Right, and they don't want to also acknowledge them even in the history books. So it's sort of like they're a forgotten lot in many ways. But every week, actually, in South Korea, a group of them and also supporters protest outside the Japanese embassy every week.
And how about here? It's not something people really...
There are other organizations that are involved, and sort of, one was sort of keeping the momentum in Congress to try to pass a resolution. So they've been trying to sort of think of different ways, especially after this case, which was going through the court systems for a number of years, and just recently was dismissed. So
now you also deal with the issue of the I believe it's toxins from the nail salon industry.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's certainly an industry that is on the increase.
Definitely.
Right.
I guess folks would think, okay, why sort of an Asian women's organization? But if you think about it, there's a lot of Asian women that are nail salon workers.
And owners.
And owners, right. So I think, nationally, over 40% are Asian. In California specifically, it's over 80%. Predominantly Vietnamese and Korean.
Right.
And so what we're concerned about is in the cosmetic industry, there's no regulation of the kinds of chemicals that they put into whether it's shampoos or nail polish. In particular, there's a chemical called phthalates, which has the highest concentration in nail polish and has been linked to birth defects and other reproductive harms. And so we're concerned because nail salon workers, many of them Asian women, are exposed to these for prolonged hours, and many of them are of childbearing age. So it's really about more of the education, and actually there was a law passed in California to start regulating the industry, and so the hope is that that will continue in other states.
Well, you're absolutely right about the long hours. I go and I visit my local nail salon, and she works 7 days a week. From morning until night without a break.
Yeah.
And I can imagine just breathing those fumes day after day, year after year. I've noticed, though, that recently they're wearing masks of some kind to at least, and maybe there's an acknowledgement that there is some harm in that.
Right, and I think just more precautions, but it's also for you as the customer to also know that certain products do have a higher concentration. So I think it's more of a worker issue as well as a consumer issue too.
Consumer issue, right. Now, that's one of the pieces of the health issues that you're dealing with. Are there other health and reproductive health issues that you're dealing with as an organization?
Definitely. I mean, we just recently also just put out a report that sort of surmises all sort of these various issues that impact Asian Pacific Islander women. In particular, Asian women are 5 times more likely to contract cervical cancer than white women. It's a really, really high number, and so sort of bringing to light and doing education around those kinds of statistics. Also, we have
is that related to? I mean, is it just genetics, or is it related to diet?
Well, it's actually related to not preventative health care. It's not getting preventative health care, because this is the most preventable form of cancer, and oftentimes they're found in later stages, where if you're able to detect it early on, it actually can be treated and and treated well. So also there's issues around healthcare. I mean, many folks don't think, well, Asian Americans, we do well, the model minority, but we actually have a very high percentage of Asian American women who don't have health insurance. And Korean Americans are the most likely of any racial ethnic group in this country to be without health insurance.
Wow.
Because many of them are business owners who are self-employed.
Right. Well, I know the preventive health care piece is an issue. And I'll tell you, there is a piece in the Asian culture that basically says, don't go to see a doctor. Because when you go to see the doctor, you actually come out sicker than before you. I tell you that because my mom has that philosophy.
Definitely.
And she had an instance where finally she had to go to the doctor because she was hemorrhaging, and she just waited and waited. So I think this whole not going for preventive care is really on target.
Yeah, definitely a distrust of potentially of Western medicine, maybe not having a doctor that looks like you, or maybe you don't speak English fluently, and so there's a not as well of that communication. So there's a number of different dynamics that can be involved. So.
And what is the organization doing about it? You've conducted this study, and by the way, where can someone get a copy of that?
Well, on our website, we have a lot of information about the various issues that we are educating the public about, and our community and policymakers. So they can go to our website,
which is
www.napawf.org.
Okay, so you have that research piece there. Okay.
And so I think that's kind of like a beginning point around sort of doing the education, and then we'll be doing more projects around some of those issues, working with the CDC around the HPV vaccine, which is a way to actually prevent cervical cancer, and so making sure that that gets out to our community. Also we do a lot of work with young individuals, young Asian Pacific Islander women, around talking about reproductive health issues. And so our focus, even though it is sort of on the policy and sort of meeting with policymakers and working with organizations, it's also about building leadership and educating our community so they themselves feel comfortable as constituents talking to their policymakers.
So you have to get that education piece out there.
No, definitely. So.
And moving people to action, especially this community, is not easy.
And to feel like my parents, it's always like 1 foot out of the country, 1 foot in, right? And so I think our generation, my generation in particular, a lot of us coming up, we're running for office, we're kind of becoming a little bit more a part of the fabric of the country.
But language is really a problem. I mean, how do we explain some of these issues to our parents when sometimes we can't even speak the same language anymore.
No, it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Right.
And that's something that we're looking at is oftentimes with organizations, like if you even think about like how do they promote a particular issue, is you have to, they do the focus groups. They do,
Right.
like how do you end up talking about a particular issue? Well, you have to find out what resonates with
Right,
that community.
right.
And it may be something very different. And even for these young women that I was mentioning where we do our leadership development program, most of their parents don't speak English. So it's how do you talk about some of these issues in a way when they don't even know the actual words
Yeah,
to
right,
use, right? So yeah.
I know, I'm one of
Yeah,
those.
yeah.
Well, just as a wrap-up question then, where do you see NAPOF in 5 years?
Well, I mean, our idea is similar to other national women's organizations that we want to be a national voice for Asian Pacific Islander women. We sort of want to be up there in DC, where folks know us, where if they need to find out something about what's going on, with Asian women, Asian Pacific Islander women, that they do come to us, and that they take our community and the women's community very seriously. And I think that's important, and I think we have to be here and physically be here, and also building power within our community for people to notice.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. Thank you very much for
Definitely.
really a lot of information that we can all benefit from. I want to thank my guest, Kiran Ahuja, for joining me, and thank all of you for being with us today. Stay well, and we'll see you next time.